Welcome, everybody, to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Manny Maradiaga. Bring you guys four new segments and stories around the NFL and discussions we can have here today around the league, free agency, trade rumors, all that is coming up on the show. On the show specifically, we're going to talk about Mac Jones and what his trade value could be in the market. Some more Steelers trade rumors, this time around a wide receiver. Find out who that player is and why these rumors are starting to come up. That's later on in the show. After that, I have my winners and losers from the NFL Combine that just finished up a few days ago over the weekend. Before I wrap it all up with the best wide receivers available after the Mike Evans deal that just concluded a few days ago, signing that extension with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There's still a lot of good free agents out there. I'm going to break that all down and give you my list of 3 wide receivers that I see fitting in best at other teams or potentially staying where they are right now. Before I jump into the first segment, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions, want to engage with the show, please use the tip and donations link that you see running across the ticker down below me. Looking at that link, if you use it, it's gsmcpodcast.net. Use it with any questions that you have. It makes it easier for me to read the question. It pops up to the right-hand side of me, just one by one down the line, and I can engage with you guys, read your questions, comments, anything that you guys might pop into your head as the show goes on. It makes the show a lot more fun, and it's a lot more engaging with you guys commenting and just reacting to some of the stuff I say. It's also of massive help for the show, not only this show, but all the shows across the network, and it's greatly appreciated every time you guys use that link, the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. In saying that, I could get started with the first segment that I mentioned before, Mac Jones and the New England Patriots, the chip shot story of the day, kicking off the show. Mac Jones and the New England Patriots are in a spot that I don't think a lot of people would have guessed a few years back when Mac Jones fell to the Patriots in that draft. I want to say it was 2021. And just in that draft alone, there was a lot of talent going around the top 3 picks. The top picks, who was going to get drafted, were the Niners going to make a trade up, were the Patriots going to make a trade up, and then nothing really happened in that draft class until New England just stayed put at 15, and they had Mac Jones fall to them. And at that point, it was presumed that Mac Jones was going to step into this new Patriots team that was still pretty talented in a good division, don't get me wrong, but Mac Jones was supposed to step in after Tom Brady, and they almost kind of had the same report card or NFL Combine tape. Brady and Jones, pocket passers, not really too athletic outside the pocket, aren't able to create the kind of plays that a Rodgers or a Mahomes could create, but they were cerebral. They could move well in the pocket. They were very intelligent. And that was sort of the story coming out of the draft with Mac Jones. And for the Pats to have him fall to him in the 2021 draft at 15 was almost like a steal because everyone assumed that Bill Belichick basically had the same quarterback and same system still in place since Tom Brady left. And they could just hit the ground running. And it almost worked out that way just because in his first season as a rookie, Mac Jones was very impressive, actually. Made a Pro Bowl that year as a rookie. Completed almost 68% of his passes. Threw for over 3,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. He led the Patriots to the playoffs. They didn't do great in those playoffs in that game against the Bills. But, regardless of that, individually, Mac Jones made the Pro Bowl. Everyone was pretty impressed with what he was able to do as a rookie. And, just looking after that, off of that, how could he get better? The numbers already as a rookie were pretty impressive for throw for almost 4,000 yards. But then he hit a bit of a bump in the road in 2022. And that was, a downgrade. A lot of people could have predicted that. But then last year, He really took a tumble, and it was really bad out there on the field in terms of production and just the stats and everything. He threw for barely 2,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. And in total, the Patriots went 4-13, the worst record under Bill Belichick in his career. But Mac Jones was in and out of the lineup, starting for over Bailey Zappi some games. Zappi got the start over him in some games after Mac Jones also was dealing with a good amount of injuries. He went 2-9 as a starter and was benched last season, like I mentioned, to Bailey Zappi. And, playing 11 games, being benched, and having that bad of a record now brings us to the point where, Bill Belichick is gone. The Patriots made that decision to move on from him. They moved on from a lot of personnel and a lot of players that they've had in their locker room. And now you get this new chapter for the Patriots under a new head coach, Gerard Mayo. It seems like forever, that Bill Belichick has been there, the success that they had, the dynasty, obviously, that they've had. To see them now go into this full transition rebuild mode, it was supposed to start with Mac Jones and just continue on. Definitely a little bit worse than, obviously, Tom Brady, who's the greatest of all time. But now that was almost very misleading with Mac Jones. For a season, everyone thought he was what he was supposed to be. Then it kind of just tailed off towards the end. And now it's kind of taking you even further back in a way because you thought you had your quarterback and you didn't. It all didn't work out. Now you have to reset everything again back compared to back when you thought you could just take it running with Mac Jones. So that's one thing that's an issue with Mac Jones and just where the Patriots are. And I think at this point with the Patriots and where they sit in terms of their fans and everything, I think this is good in a way just because, they could only go so long, I'm assuming, with seeing just kind of plugs being plugged into holes just to kind of stop the bleeding for a little bit. And now all these fans are so used to success year in and year out. I think it's come to a point now with all these quarterbacks that with Bill Belichick as well, it's hard to say we want to get rid of Bill. It's over. He's done. He has nothing more to give because he's arguably the greatest coach of all time. People have had that debate. People will continue to have that debate. That's up to you guys to decide. But they finally decided to move on from him, and now it's time to bring in somebody new. They have the number 3 pick overall in the draft, and that obviously brings a lot of excitement, but there's still a lot of holes to fill with this team other than what you can get from Mac Jones. Mac Jones can contribute to that a little bit, just talks around the league, talks around executives and what people have been hearing. One report is that, 3 NFL front office executives estimate that Mac Jones' trade value is around a 5th rounder right now, while others say that the Patriots would be lucky, in their words, to get a 6th rounder in exchange for Mac Jones up to this point. That's according to Andrew Callahan and Doug Kyed of the Boston Herald. And those are pretty strong words just because of everything I mentioned already before with Mac Jones, the success he had early on. Nobody would have ever imagined you're talking right now after, his 4th year now? His 4th year that he could barely muster a 6th or a 5th round pick in exchange for Mac Jones, a 1st round pick, 15th overall. It's crazy to where we've gone, but I think this has all kind of slowly been building in a way to kind of contradict that. And, there was also those moments on the field where I'm not going to say Mac is a dirty player because, you got to know the guy really to say something like that, but he has had actions where he's kicked a guy maybe below the belt or he's just done other extracurricular things that people have noticed. Everything's caught on camera. You can't really escape that. And he's done it on multiple occasions now. And that also plays into account this narrative, this negative narrative around Mac Jones because of that extracurricular stuff. And if you don't back it up on the field, where do you expect to be if people are just going to jump on you after every mistake you make. You're giving them more reason to support that negative narrative and then just run with it. If you're not backing it up, and if you're also doing all this other extra stuff, it's not going to pan out for you, especially with the Patriots, because they're up to a point, like I mentioned, with the fans and the organization, where they're at that breaking point where they had to change something, and they've clearly cleared house completely. And now Mac Jones, they're trying to gauge where they could go with Mac Jones. He's only 25 years old in saying that, and it begs the question of what is it going to take for him to start again? Could he be a starter again? I think if he cleans up some of those other stuff, like I mentioned, the kicking people below the groin or just doing all this extra stuff, I think if he cleans that up and then just finds a home with the Rams or something like that, or the Raiders, who are sitting in a tricky spot in the NFL draft, I think he could compete for jobs there. Matthew Stafford will obviously be the starter with the Rams, but in a year or two, who knows the level of of Matthew Stafford. And if you have Mac Jones sitting there, what do you have to lose to try him out, maybe play him? Sean McVay's a great head coach offensive-wise, and I'm sure he could find a way to reignite the career of Mac Jones around all the weapons that they now have with Cooper Kupp, Puka, Kyron Williams. I think he needs to be surrounded around a lot of talent with a team, kind of like a Brock Purdy. I'm not calling him a game manager. I'm not saying that. If that's a good thing or a bad thing, who knows? But I think he needs a lot more support than all these other guys, like a Pat Mahomes, like a CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow. I think Mac needs a bit more support, and he didn't have that in New England as well. They didn't do an adequate job of providing that for him, and now we're up to this point, and I'm not saying it's over for Mac Jones, but we're trying to gauge where he could end up and what the Patriots could get back for him, because to spend a first-round pick on him and now to barely get a fifth or a sixth, they're going to try to get wherever they want at this point and just move on from him and most likely draft a quarterback number 3 overall, but there's also been rumors of them trying to sign a veteran to mature with the rookie quarterback and then take it from there, taking a lot more calculated approach to their quarterback search rather than just throwing in the rookie and gambling to maybe pan out like Mac Jones in his first season, but they want to see consistency of success with the rookie. So they're not going to rush it this time. I think that's smart. And, I'm looking forward to see where Mac Jones goes. I think it would be very interesting to see what kind of system fits him and what kind of team takes a gamble on him to see what they can get out of him, because he did show talent and some promise in the NFL and obviously at Alabama. So it is there. I think a coach, an organization, a team just has to find it again and reignite it to get him going again. But I'm going to leave that conversation there. We're going to move on to the next topic. That's around the Steelers, but that will be coming up after the break. The Steelers are constantly in trade rumors around quarterback. Who's going to be the quarterback? Is it Kenny Pickett? Is it not Kenny Pickett? This time, more trade rumors, but about a wide receiver. One of their wide receivers is reportedly unhappy, and the Steelers could be open to trading him for potentially the right price. So find out who that is and why that is after the break. You're watching the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. In the previous segment, if you missed it, I talked about Mac Jones and his market value right now circulating around the NFL and what people think about that and my thoughts on that as well. But if you're just joining me now, you're just in time to tune into the discussion around the Steelers wide receiver potentially up for a trade. There's been a lot of rumors and talks swirling up right now around the Steelers wide receivers, that being Diontae Johnson. He is the most experienced receiver in the Steelers locker room, and just coming off of last year, he had a decent season, but there was a lot of off the field, on the sidelines, interactions, rumors that Diontae might not be happy with the situation, his target share. The whole offense as a whole last year was a mess. Nobody doesn't know that, with the offensive coordinator, the quarterback carousel that they had after Kenny Pickett got hurt, bringing in Mason Rudolph, Mitchell Trubisky. It was all a mess, and you could kind of see why Diontae Johnson would be angry. But now, it's been a couple seasons now that people can get angry on the sidelines, but you have to back it up with production, unquestionable production, for people to really back you and support you when you're upset. And that's not really been the case for Diontae Johnson. He has been coming out of decent seasons. He had one season where he didn't score a single touchdown. That's not all on him, but it is a fact. It's a stat out there. An unbelievable stat for a lot of people. You're thinking, how could a wide receiver not score one touchdown the whole season? And, he's also on an expiring deal. The Steelers actually extended him 2 years ago to this date, now to this year, to a 2-year, $36 million contract, $27 of that $1 million being guaranteed. And he's entering the final year of that minimal extension now. And, he's not pushing 30, but he is getting a little bit up there. I think he's 28, 29 in just off the top of my head. And, you have George Pickens already. And after that, you have Allen Robinson, Calvin Austin, two receivers that haven't really made an impact with the Steelers. George Pickens is obviously trending towards that number one spot now, even though Deontay's been there a little longer. And just rumors around the trading block suggest that he could be unhappy up to this point with his share and things like that. And on top of that, the Steelers actually had a good amount of formal meetings with some top receivers in the NFL draft. Nothing unusual, really, because they always have meetings, formal or informal, with a bunch of wide receivers, at least that I've noticed following the team in the past 10 plus years. They've always had these meetings just with receivers because you only get a good amount of formal meetings at the combine. And why wouldn't you want to meet with some of these top guys in case the situation arises that, you're in need of them? Maybe not now, but down the line, if they are on an expiring rookie deal and it looks like they're not going to sign for anybody, they could think back to that meeting they had with the Steelers. The Steelers could think back to that meeting they had with that player and think, oh, he was a great guy. He had a great interview back in the combine 3-4 years ago. Why don't we take a stab at him and see if he would want to sign here? That's, I think, where their mindset kind of goes. They met specifically with receivers like Rome Odunze and Keon Coleman, two guys that are rumored to go in the first round. So that's eye-catching in itself. But, from my point of view, I don't really see too much into that. It's just protocol. You're not going to meet with just the positions that you need because there's not enough guys that you value high enough to fill up all those formal meeting slots that you have. So, why not meet with a top running back, a top wide receiver? They didn't meet with a lot of or any top quarterbacks from what I saw. So that was interesting because obviously the whole quarterback issue. But going back to Diontae, that's already eye-catching. They're meeting with receivers. Then reports come out like the one from Tony Pauline where he said, while it's not fair to say Johnson is on the trading block, several people tell me the Steelers are open to moving the receiver if they receive fair compensation. And of course, like a lot of athletes now, basically everybody goes on social media, reacts to it, says a very quick sentiment. He says it is what it is with the shrug emoji. And, I think that tweet was later deleted. And, it got a reaction out of Johnson. He let people know how he felt. And as soon as the reports come out and they start getting traction, you got some fans that jump on that report and also, heavily agree with it. There are some fans that don't think Deontay is an unquestionable, unmovable wide receiver, star player that, can't be looked at in a trade. Just off of the facts of the stats, the success that he's had. He hasn't really made that big jump in his career. The best season that he's had, really, I think, was with Big Ben, his last couple seasons, or just 1 or 2 years that when Juju was still here. But other than that, he hasn't really made that great jump. He's got a decent skill set. He's a good route runner, decent deep ball threat, but you don't see the kind of qualities that just pop out like a George Pickens. George Pickens is on social media, on the news, all these outlets where he makes a crazy catch. He's got the size, the speed. He does everything that you would want a wide receiver one to do. And I think that piling on with, once Kenny Pickett got drafted, there was immediately all these things about, Kenny Pickett to Pickens. It's Pickett to Pickens. It's going to be this great connection for however many years down the line. Almost people forgetting that Deontay Johnson has been there and he's been the number one guy for this long. And then George Pickens comes in and people just put him as the number one guy. And maybe Deontay felt a certain way about that, maybe not. I wouldn't know that personally, but, he obviously sees that and he's going to have a reaction to it, positive or negatively. And that all kind of adds into this trade rumor where he's happy with Kenny Pickett, he's not happy with Kenny Pickett, with the team. His attitude's been thrown into question as well at some points. Just off the top of my mind, the Bengals game at Cincinnati this year, it was a fumble play. Jalen Warren fumbled, and Deontay Johnson was blocking, and Warren fumbled almost in his eyesight, in his path where he was blocking, and he sort of just looked at it and didn't jump on it. The Bengals recovered it. They had pretty much a free recovery to it because Deontay didn't jump on it or try to tackle them until the play developed a little longer, and then he kind of, snapped back into it and started running after them. They tackled him in the end, but that moment right there showed a lot of people or gave people reason to think that, this guy isn't about the team really at all. He's airing his frustrations with the lack of targets and catches that he might not get, but then he's also showing this sort of attitude, and people just immediately pile on to him about his attitude, his character. He had to answer some questions about it afterwards, but that is another reason why people aren't shy about airing their frustrations with him, building on to these reports a lot more for the Steelers trading or potentially wanting to trade Deontay Johnson. And just thinking about it, all the facts that I just mentioned and the situation with his contract, the reports, you sit back and you think, what can you get in return, really? Are the Steelers in a position to trade away a reliable number 2 receiver that's been there for a good amount? He knows the organization. The organization knows what they're going to get from him. Are they in a position of luxury to trade him away and maybe get something as equal as him back? I would probably say no, because they got other holes to fill. I'm not going to say the quarterback because that's obvious. O-line, they just released their center. They need a new offensive tackle to slide Broderick Jones, their first-round pick last year, back to his natural position in left tackle. So they're going to be looking at tackles, centers. They need a corner opposite of Joey Porter Jr., which they hit on last year. That was a great pick, but now they need somebody on the other side to complement him. They haven't had a great inside linebacker since Ryan Shazier tragically got hurt. So that's another spot. Last year, virtually all of their inside linebackers got hurt, and that cost them in the playoffs and down the regular season. And then you could start looking at defensive line as well. Cam Hayward's getting older. Yeah, you drafted Keanu Benton. I'm a big fan of Keanu Benton, but you're gonna need more to replenish the time and the skill set that Cam Hayward gives you when he decides to hang it up, and that's coming sooner rather than later. As well as just thinking about the safety position, someone opposite of Minkah Fitzpatrick. They had DeMonte KZ in there, Keanu Neal in there at times, but that was just a revolving position, had players in and out of it, players hurt, forcing them to be in and out of the lineup. Minkah Fitzpatrick got hurt a good amount last season, so that's another position where they could definitely build on. I don't think they could now look at wide receiver and willingly get rid of a decent one, a good one, and then, figure out the rest of the positions afterwards. I don't think that would be smart for them to do. I think Omar Khan would be, or is smarter than that to do that. Trade him for anything less than a second or a third, I think would be throwing that opportunity away. But that's just the reports, what's kind of gained traction as of late. And, there's no guarantee if you get a second-round pick, a third-round pick, and if you spend that on a wide receiver, there's no guarantee he's going to be an A1 wide receiver 2 kind of player that could immediately contribute. Every player's different coming into the NFL, and you can hope and think, and project that he's going to be good right away, but you truly never know until they produce it. George Pickens had freakish ability, freakish size, speed, and everything. He adjusted a lot quicker than most receivers I have seen do. So there's all that, as well as something else that I found interesting just about this whole Deontay Johnson situation with trades and some fans wanting him out. It didn't help at the end of last year when Johnson almost aired what quarterback he preferred in that little battle that they had with Mason Rudolph and Kenny Pickett. Once Kenny Pickett got hurt, Mitchell came in and it wasn't a success at all. So they had to move on from Mitchell Trubisky and start Mason Rudolph. And Mason Rudolph, I understand, has been with Deontay Johnson a long time. They've been there virtually the same amount of time with the Steelers. And he basically said in an interview after the Bills game, he said, I kind of had high hopes for him to do what he's doing. He came in and became the starter, so hopefully he gets the job next year, do what he got to do. Other than that, he did a great job, man. Talking about Rudolph after that Bills game. And, you're sort of nitpicking right now, potentially reading too far into those quotes, but some people, and I could see where they're coming from, might look at that and think, he obviously prefers Mason Rudolph over Kenny Pickett. They had some pretty explosive games with Mason Rudolph. I'll give him that. But at the same time, you can't say that if you're Deontay Johnson. I get it that Mason did great. You want to support Mason. Everyone should support Mason because he was the third string, took advantage of his opportunity and ran with it, had good success to make the playoffs. But he said it so nonchalantly and very confident, almost too favoring Mason Rudolph a bit too much. I've never seen him say something too positively about Kenny in comparison to the other quarterbacks. Yeah, he supported Kenny, but he's not almost chosen him over the other quarterbacks as much as he has in this quote. So just adds more fuel to the fire. And it brings us to this point where, the Steelers might want to listen to offers for Johnson. There's nothing wrong with that, but you're going to have to wait and see how he responds to that, how the Steelers act in free agency. There's a good amount of wide receiver free agents out there that I'm going to get into later in this show. Do the Steelers take a peek at that? And just through the draft as well, the Steelers love drafting wide receivers. It's been a trend in the last drafts for a while now. It usually happens in that second round, but I just think this year it's a little bit different because you have more holes around the team than you expected, than a lot of fans might really know of. And I think you have to address those first before you can begin any sort of talks, entertain any sort of offers around Deontay Johnson and wanting to get rid of him. I think it's best to ride out this last year with him, and then if he doesn't produce and if it's still looking the same on offense, even with Arthur Smith there, I think then you kind of know where you are as a team. You're undoubtedly going to get better through the draft this year and through free agency. I think you can just wait it out one more year, not take too much of a gamble, and just let him walk, or potentially get towards the end of the season and then trade him. We'll see where that goes. I'm going to leave that conversation there. It's a lot of ifs, maybes, and a lot of just opinions up to this point because it's just been a report that's been thrown out there, but it's getting a lot of traction, mostly with Steelers fans because some of them aren't shy about sharing their frustrations with anybody on the team. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to leave that segment there. I'm going to send it to a quick break. And on the other side of that break, I'm going to bring you more on the NFL Combine, my winners and my losers, as well as the biggest story on which wide receivers I believe are the best available out there on the market that teams can take a stab at as we get closer and closer to the start of the new league year. Don't go anywhere. More on those stories on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you for joining me on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. If you missed the last segment, I talked about the Steelers and some potential trade rumors around them and their wide receiver Deontay Johnson, why those have kind of stirred up recently and my thoughts on them, and should the Steelers actually go through with it. That was in the last segment. Now, if you're joining me for the second half of the show, I'm going to get into two more stories. But before I do that, I want to remind you guys, if you guys are just tuning into the show now or have been watching, if you have any questions, want to engage with me, please use the tip and donations link that you see on the screen right now. It's gsmcpodcast.net. And if you're just listening to this episode, again, it's gsmcpodcast.net. This just makes sure your questions, I'm able to read your questions on air. They pop up here at the top of the list, and I'm able to engage with you guys. It's a massive help for the shows across the network, and we send a big thank you to you guys for being able to do this with any of your questions. That allows me to move into the third segment of this show with the Combine now officially being over with. It's in the past now. A lot of reactions and a lot of viral moments. History was made at the Combine with one of the players I want to mention here today. Part of my winners group that I have here from the NFL Combine. I'm going to start with the winners that I believed raised their stock the most this past weekend in the drills, the interviews, and all sort of stuff like that. And I'm also going to give my players, my losers, if you will, that kind of had their draft stock drop a little bit for a variety of reasons. Leading off with the first winner, arguably the biggest winner, or actually I shouldn't say the biggest winner. I should say the most underrated winner of this past weekend, in my estimation, that being the defensive lineman from Florida State, Brandon Fisk. At defensive lineman, I think the biggest prospect coming out of it was Byron Murphy from Texas. And, Brandon Fisk was in conversations of being a solid player, but he did very good in the tests and in the position drills, and he just showed great athleticism from all the clips that I saw around social media. He had a 4.7 840, a 9 foot 9 inch broad jump, and he just looked super smooth and super just quick off the ball and with his jump. for a defensive lineman to run a sub 4.8 40 and have very good test results after that. He ran that at nearly 300 pounds. Brandon Fisk had great test results and just showed people a lot of things that I think he trained on during this period that you have between college and, the offseason and then getting into the NFL draft. I think he did a very good job of training himself leading up to this moment, knowing that this could be a great opportunity for him to jump off draft boards. And I think he showed a lot of promise in those drills. And I think he'll arguably won't be the number one defensive tackle or defensive lineman, wherever teams want to line him up in this year's draft, just based on value and attention that a guy like Byron Murphy will get. A lot of people will be looking towards him. And now with Brandon Fisk, some people might have him higher, but they know they could wait on him a little bit longer because he's not talked about as much. He's definitely gained some notoriety from this past weekend, but I still think teams will wait on him a little bit. He might be trending now towards the end of the first, top of the second. I can't see him dropping any lower than middle of the second with the sort of results that he has, and then he has his pro day to build on top of that. I think he's built a good case for himself in this draft just at the start of it. But moving on to my second winner, being the defensive back from Toledo, Quinyon Mitchell. And I've followed Mitchell a little bit longer before he got to the NFL draft. He was actually a performer at the Senior Bowl. He was a participant in that, as well as a bunch of other prospects at the Combine. And he had a great Senior Bowl. Probably the best defensive back at the Senior Bowl. Had a lot of good one-on-one drills against very highly touted wide receivers. Got the best of a lot of them at the Senior Bowl. Gained a lot of attention from coaches. I remember specifically Mike Tomlin. He was always talking to him. He actually went up to him in the wide receiver drills, the one-on-one drills, and challenged him to take on Roman Wilson, the wide receiver from Michigan. They had their one-on-one. Mitchell didn't do his best in that drill. I think Roman Wilson got the best of him, but he showed that character, that willingness to compete. He showed a lot of good ball skills as well at the Senior Bowl. And then I think he carried that over and surprised a lot of people with his test results as well, because he ran the fourth fastest overall of all the prospects at the Combine. Ran a 4.33. The second fastest among defensive backs. The fastest was Nate Wiggins. But you pile that on top of his good size at 6 foot. He showed good agility on the back pedal drills, just all the position drills, fluid in all of those drills. And the only thing that I would count as a negative would be just his hands. He has good hand-eye, or he's in the right positions to make these plays, but his hand-eye coordination, his habits of catching the balls with his body rather than his hands was the only thing I just have an irrational preference there. Anytime I see someone catch it with their body, it bothers me. It bothers me seeing people just catch it with their body instead of just their hands, compared to these other guys that you see, like Terrion Arnold had a lot of good hands catches. Nate Wiggins couldn't participate because he tweaked his groin, I want to say, but he's also another one that is good with his hands. And that's the only thing I would say about Quinyon Mitchell. His hand-eye coordination could be a little bit better. And just from reading reports, his fluidness, his movement, trying to follow man coverage, being one-on-one with someone could be better. But I think athletically, he surprised a lot of people and just caught a lot of people's attention with his results. And I think more people will look into him because of that, and his stock will rise more and more, especially if he participates at his pro day. I expect him to grow. He's probably the second best corner right now, listed behind Terrion Arnold, and I think just above Nate Wiggins, because Nate Wiggins couldn't participate any further in the Combine. But that's where Mitchell stands up to this point. And my biggest winner, I'm sure the winner on a lot of these lists, is wide receiver from Texas, Xavier Worthy. I don't have to say much other than he broke the 40-yard dash record at the NFL Combine. Actually ran a 4.22 on the field, but then later the referees or the officials came back and told him that he officially broke it at 4.21. So already that breaking the records, making history, is going to shoot you up a lot of teams' draft boards. And he's not just a speed guy. That's going to catch a lot of people's eye. But if you watch him at Texas, watch him develop over the season, he's a very good route runner, uses his agility well. Of course, he can take the top of defenses, but short routes, intermediate routes, he's very good and very quick to get off of the one-on-one coverage, find the zone pockets in opposing defenses. So I think that's also very attractive, and then to showcase your speed like this was taking it to another level. He had a 10-foot, 11-inch broad jump. He didn't participate in those position drills just because he's waiting for his pro day, and he didn't feel quite ready to do it. He decided not to, like a bunch of other prospects did. But it's interesting with Xavier Worthy because he almost reminds you a lot of other fast wide receivers in the NFL. And sure, he might not jump into the top 20, maybe not for some people, but late first round, the Chiefs could steal him late in the first round. And if they do, he kind of reminds you a little bit of Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill, able to take the top off the defense. They have a great receiver in Rashee Rice. Bring in Xavier Worthy, have that deep ball threat that I think Sky Moore was supposed to be, but he hasn't really panned out too much. I think they could have a lot more success with Xavier Worthy, and I think it's a very attractive proposal on my part, just throwing that out there. I could see it happening. The Chiefs just stealing a very talented wide receiver just because they're the Chiefs and it happens to them. But those were the three biggest winners in my estimation. Some honorable mentions I have were Rome Odunze, just because he was solid overall on the day. And Ejarian Cooper was another one, the linebacker out of Texas A&M. And Isaac Guerrero, the running back from, I forgot where he was from. I forgot the school he's from. It's not coming to me. But he had a good showing as well. Athletically, he tested very well. He tested first among running backs in athleticism, and he also ran a 4.33. Similar to Quinyon Mitchell, he was near the top of the leaderboards in that position. So he was another one that was up there. And Odunze had a great combine, but he already had top of the draft projections, so he wasn't a big winner, a big riser. So I threw him in there as an honorable mention because I think interview-wise, personality-wise, I think he impressed a lot of people. But moving on to my losers, I also have three, starting off with the cornerback from Alabama, Kool-Aid McKinstry. I think at the start of his whole college journey, I think he was projected to be the best among these defensive backs. But at the combine and just leading into it, he was dealing with a foot injury, wasn't able to participate. And because of that, and not having a great last year at Alabama, piling that on top of great performances by Terrion Arnold at the combine, Quinyon Mitchell, like I mentioned, was a big winner, very popular among a lot of people. And Nate Wiggins just running an outstanding 40. People are just going to gravitate towards that. And because he didn't participate, because there's questions around his foot injury, his performance at Alabama that last year, it's going to be tough. He's going to have a great pro day to kind of catch up to these other guys because he didn't participate due to the injury. That's reasonable, but, he's kind of has to catch up now. And there's more pressure on him now to perform at his pro day and show why he can compete with these other guys that have surprised a lot of people. Another loser that I have might be a surprising one, but for me, it was Amarius Mims, the tackle from Georgia. Another one that got injured running the 40-yard dash. He tweaked his hamstring, and now with his pro day coming up, there's still questions there if he's going to participate. I think he has to participate to show these scouts and these teams that go see him, what he's all about. Because in reality, the facts are that he had very limited starts at Georgia. He had only 8 career starts. And just based on the performances by the other tackles in the draft, Joe Alt, Troy Fautanu, and Talise Fuaga, all these guys had great performances at the combine. They're jumping up ranks. And because he got hurt, and there's been injury concerns with him as well. He's had ankle injuries. Now he's tweaked his hamstring. And with the limited experience that he had in college already, some people might think of it as a bit of a gamble to spend a first-round pick on him because of the medical history. He's got amazing size. His measurements are through the roof. He's 6'8" and 340 at weight. He ran a 5.07 and had a 9-foot 3-inch broad jump as an offensive tackle, which are all crazy numbers for a guy that big at 6'8" to post those numbers. But, there's just going to be questions around his injuries, his health, and I think, again, he's another guy that has to perform if he makes it to his Pro Bowl because of that tweaked hamstring. Those are always tricky to deal with. If he gets there and is able to take part in these drills and just perform in front of these NFL teams, I think there's more pressure on him to show why he's good, why he's touted to be a first-round selection. But, he got injured. That's unfortunate, but that's the situation he faces. And another one that could be questionable, but in my estimation was a loser, was just because of his great expectations kind of being dropped down a little bit. That's Drake May, the quarterback from North Carolina, decided not to participate at the combine, and you have guys now rising up like Michael Penix, J.J. McCarthy rising up draft boards. He didn't participate. There's been more questions raised about his decision making, his fundamentals and stuff like that, and he didn't have a chance to rebuttal those doubts, and now he's in a situation now where people have the gap between him and these other quarterbacks a lot closer than it might be, it might not be. We're going to have to see how these guys pan out. But because he decided to not participate, he's going to be... He seemed to be the only quarterback that was talked about worse and talked about in a negative light compared to these other guys, Michael Penix, J.J. McCarthy, Caleb Williams. There were some around Caleb Williams and not deciding to take the medical, but it seemed like all these other guys were very built up. I saw a lot of talk about Jaden Daniels being the number 1 pick over Caleb Williams. JJ jumping up to be a top 5 pick. Michael Penix surprised a lot of people by the way the ball just flew out of his hand throwing-wise. And Drake May, he's in a weird spot now where if you're a big fan of him, you still have him at 3. But if you had doubts already, I think those doubts grew a little bit more because he decided to not participate as these other guys did and build his resume a little bit more with these teams. But, they're going to have other chances to do it at his pro day. He's going to certainly throw and do everything there. But for right now, those are my 3 biggest losers. I'm going to leave it there, and you guys, as always, can comment. Tell me if you agree, if there's a guy I missed, if there's a guy that shouldn't be on either of those lists. I want to know it all, and I want to know what you guys think of that. But that just brings me to the last break I'm going to take in this show. And on the other side of it, I'm going to run through the best available wide receivers that I think are left in free agency for these teams after Mike Evans was taken off the market by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and re-signing there with the Bucs. So don't go anywhere. That conversation is coming up after the break on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast for the last segment of today's show. The best available wide receivers after the Mike Evans deal. He signed a 2-year, $52 million deal to stay in Tampa Bay. But now there's still a decent amount of receivers out there, especially now with the news of who got tagged at the deadline, who's planning to be a free agent. I want to be honest and preface this by saying that if it were up to me, if I were a GM making these decisions, I honestly would rather go with receivers in the draft over free agency just because of the market that everyone's in right now. Garnering that type of money to some of these guys that weren't franchise tagged, I think would be going a little bit too far, especially with this wide receiver class as highly touted as it has been. I think a lot of people will believe that this is one of the best wide receiver classes, one of the deepest classes we've seen in a long time. And I just think there's less risk in drafting a guy there if the decision was up to me, but it's not. So I'm going to talk about the best available receivers that are left on the market, starting with my number 3 being Tyler Boyd, a free agent for the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals right now face a situation where the extension of Jamar Chase is looming. It's in everyone's heads, and it's going to come sooner rather than later. You want to get over that sooner rather than later. And on top of that, you have T. Higgins, and he's seen as a potential number 1 wide receiver on a lot of other teams that could be interested in trading for him. There's been rumors around the Bengals settling for a sign and trade with that franchise tag with T. Higgins, and that could be a reality. So those are 2 pretty serious problems that the Bengals have to deal with, and I think Tyler Boyd, if they were choosing between all 3, he would be the one left out. He's going to be 30 in November, so that also doesn't help his case really with the Bengals, but it's not really old by any means for a receiver, and I think he could be a big help elsewhere, specifically with teams like the Eagles, the Steelers, the Falcons, the Chiefs even, needing a veteran sort of player to come in and be a reliable tight end-ish, middle of the field, short check down kind of guy that they could go to. He doesn't need a crazy amount of targets because he's already coming from a situation that he didn't get 10 targets, 12 targets per game, 8 targets per game. He knows that was designated for the younger, talented wide receivers that are on the come-up. So I think that wouldn't be a problem with him. SportRack actually values him right now around a 3-year, $26 million deal. So that would be $8 million per year to get a reliable, save-hand wide receiver for these teams. And I think he would just bring a security to a lot of these offenses with young quarterbacks or with quarterbacks with young people on their team. And he could help out a lot to kind of settle things down and be a reliable target for some of these teams like I mentioned, the Eagles, the Steelers, the Falcons, and the Chiefs. So that's number 3 on my list. Number 2 would be Gabe Davis. Still very young, coming from a good situation with the Bills, but they're also dealing with salary cap issues, trying to bring down that deficit as much as they can. It raises the question of Stephon Diggs. There were trade rumors around Stephon Diggs and how he could help the cap, but I find it unlikely that they do that. And it seems more and more likely on that topic that Gabe Davis is going to be one of those casualties because of the cap, because of, I think, the direction this Bills team is trending. I think they're going to use a lot more of Dalton Kincaid and James Cook, Dawson Knox if he's there. They're going to become a lot more run-heavy, I think, with Josh Allen and James Cook and trying to involve those guys a lot more. Sure, they can draft a wide receiver, and they still have guys like Khalil Shakir there, who are great pieces, solid wide receivers, but I think they just complement a more sort of run-style game that Gabe Davis, don't get me wrong, adds to that. He's a great blocker, but I think they are willing to let him go and be content with what they have in the building to just support their more run-heavy style of offense. You saw it more towards the playoffs where Josh Allen was running a lot more. Dalton Kincaid stepped into his role and kind of grew out of his just rookie tight end role and became a very good weapon for them. And I just think Gabe Davis, still young, could still get a massive contract somewhere else, will take advantage of that. And, Sport Rag as well has him at around a 4-year, $55 million deal. If he were to sign that big of a deal, would bring him to almost $13.5 million for his services. And he hasn't had the numbers to back that up. The majority of the targets have gone to Stephon Diggs, obviously, because of the talent that Diggs has and the kind of money that they're paying him, and because of the relationship he has with Josh Allen. He kind of hasn't had the resume to back up that big of a contract, I believe. But there's definitely teams out there like the Commanders, Chiefs, and potentially the Cincinnati Bengals. If they just sign him on a short-term deal, I think he'd be open to sign a short-term deal if it's with one of those Chiefs, Bengals, in the NFC, maybe the Niners if Ayuk's gone. If he wants to sign to one of these teams, I think he'd be willing to take a shorter deal to sign with one of these contenders. But if he goes to the Lions, the Commanders, or something like that, I think he's going to want more money, more security there to make his time there. You don't want to say worth it, but, just to have some compensation back there for some potential struggles, growing pains, stuff like that. And he's very talented, has good size and everything at 6'2", great in the run game. Another guy that could add another dimension to a variety of these teams like I mentioned. And number one, before people lose their heads or anything, this list was made before Michael Pittman signed the franchise tag, or before the Colts signed or told them that he was going to get franchise tag. So, he would have been number one, but he was always going to get franchise tag. So he was off the list. He didn't meet the qualifications for this list. And another one that was interesting was Diggs. I thought about it, but he's not really available per se. There's just been trade rumors. So he was an idea that I floated out there, but he wouldn't make the list as well. So my number one on this list, best available wide receiver, is Calvin Ridley. He could have been franchise tagged by the Jaguars, but if he signed a contract extension eventually with them this offseason, he would have been, or it would have allowed the Falcons to turn that third-round pick into a second-round pick. And, he's valued right now, according to Sport Rack, at 4 years, $68 million for him, $17 million per year. That's a heavy price range if you're kind of committing to what kind of contract he would want, and to then give up a second-round pick to the Falcons, that might have been too expensive for the Jaguars. So they didn't do anything with him. He's going to test the free agency market, and because of that, he sits at number one. He is going to be 30 in December, this coming December, obviously during the middle of the season. So that's a factor in whether or not teams want to sign him to a long-term deal, 3 years plus. That's up to the team and how they value what their cap situation is. But in terms of talent and just recent production, he's coming off a 1,000-yard season, led the Jaguars in receiving touchdowns and receiving yards. And other than that, he had that whole gambling issue. I think that's in his past. And I think these next few years, on top of this last season, are going to be some of his best if he signs with the right team. I would love to see him with the Lions. They have a good amount of cap space. I think they're top 5 in cap space among the teams that are the leaders in cap space room. So I would love to see him sign with the Lions to complement Amon-Ra St. Brown, as well as maybe even the Cardinals, because they have a lot of draft picks. They're an exciting young team with Kyler Murray there. If they re-sign Marquise Brown on a minimal deal, and then say potentially they draft Marvin Harrison, that would be an exciting wide receiver room, an exciting offense to complement Kyler Murray, James Conner, and that offense that they're trying to get going in Arizona. But then there's also the Washington Commanders. If they get a quarterback, that could also be exciting if it's Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams if he goes number 2. To pair him up with Calvin Ridley, a solid wide receiver 1 with these kind of numbers that I just mentioned, not only will it help the quarterback out, but it'll make the transition for the quarterback a lot easier with an established wide receiver one. They're just waiting for him. Then there's other teams like the Titans as well. They need someone opposite of DeAndre Hopkins, so they would love another wide receiver. It all has to work out in their cap, and they have a new quarterback, a young quarterback in Will Levis. They're trying to build that offense up through their new offense with obviously a new head coach in there as well. They could be an option, but Calvin Ridley, I am a fan of him. Skill-wise, ability-wise, I think he really hasn't shown that he's lost a step, and I think he'd be a big help. Compared to these other wide receivers, I think he would be ready to help out the most right now, right away, to any of these other teams that decides to sign him. Free agency is only going to get crazier and crazier now that the franchise tag deadline is gone. It's past us now. We're going to head into the new year, which is about almost a little bit over a week from today. It starts on the 13th, and there's been a lot of initial dominoes that have fallen already. Mike Evans off the market. All these free agents now available. I think teams are starting to become more active, and a lot of these hypotheticals are going to start becoming realities, and it's just going to bring a lot more things for me to talk about, and I'm very excited to get going in that process. But in saying that, that's all the time I'm going to have for today's episode. I want to say a big thank you to you guys again for listening, tuning in, and watching these episodes as well. Even if you tune in late, I greatly appreciate every time you guys do that. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. It's a big help every time you guys do that, and make sure to also follow us on our other social media networks, platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all that for more sports content as well as other content across other networks and other podcasts as well. And if you do like this show and want to see more of me and this show, please make sure to check out both the Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube for YouTube Shorts that I put out there as well. Individual segments from these live shows if you missed one of them and want to recap on one of them, as well as full other live shows that I've done in the past. It's all on there on both channels, so make sure to go check that out. In saying that, I've been your host, Manny Maradiaga. Tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football conversations. Take it easy, guys. I'll see you guys all same time tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't